Alright, buckle up. Today we are dissecting the personality of Hillary Rodham Clinton, lawyer, First Lady, Senator, Secretary of State, two-time presidential candidate, and part-time email deletion enthusiast. We're not talking about policies in a boring way. We're talking about her, the mind behind the scandals, the ambition, the endless pantsuits. And remember, I'm not a licensed psychologist. I'm just a person who read too many case studies and now pretends to diagnose public figures on YouTube, which frankly still makes me more qualified than most cable news anchors. Before we dive in, smash the like button and subscribe, because unlike Hillary's email server, I promise to keep my content available to the public. Hillary was born in 1947 in Chicago into a middle-class Methodist family. Her dad, Hugh Rodham, was strict to the point of harsh, and her mum, Dorothy, survived a brutal childhood. Psychologically speaking, this is a recipe for resilience mixed with a desperate need to prove yourself. Imagine a drill sergeant raising you, while your mum quietly whispers, "Toughen up, or life will eat you alive." It's no wonder Hillary grew into the kind of person who could smile politely through congressional hearings that would make most humans sweat through 3 layers of deodorant. Even in college, she was ambitious. At Wellesley, she gave the graduation speech calling out Senator Edward Brooke. At Yale Law, she met Bill Clinton, and instead of seeing him as just a charming saxophone guy, she basically clocked him as her future running mate in life. So from the start, we've got a personality shaped by pressure, high standards, and a survivalist edge. And that survivalist edge would become her calling card in politics, and her Achilles heel when the scandals started piling up. Ambition is Hillary's baseline personality trait. If ambition were electricity, she'd be powering entire cities. She's conscientious, driven, and competitive. Psychologists would call it achievement motivation. I'd call it the reason she stuck by Bill through the Lewinsky scandal. Let's be real. Loyalty was probably part love, part calculation. She knew that sticking it out with Bill gave her a political launchpad of her own. That's Hillary's psychology in a nutshell. Never waste a crisis, especially if it can be weaponized into a Senate seat. But ambition, unchecked, makes people look calculating. Her laugh, her speeches, her body language, it often feels like she's running everything through a mental filter labelled, "Will this get me votes?" That's why critics say she's robotic, because she kind of is. She's like a computer programmed for political survival, but the empathy software never fully loaded. Alright, let's talk about Benghazi. September 11th, 2012. Not exactly a date you want attached to your resume. The US consulate in Benghazi, Libya came under attack. Militants stormed the compound. 4 Americans were killed, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. It was chaotic, brutal, and politically explosive. Now, most people in that situation would have immediately gone into crisis management meltdown. Screaming staffers, finger-pointing, mass resignations, the usual government response when something goes horribly wrong. But Hillary Clinton, she handled it like someone who had already built psychological walls thicker than Fort Knox. Here's the thing. Hillary has what psychologists call extreme compartmentalization. She can take a horrifying event, put it in a mental filing cabinet, and carry on with her job while the rest of us would still be hyperventilating into a paper bag. This is why, during the investigation, she sat through nearly 11 hours of congressional hearings with the composure of someone waiting for a pedicure. But here's where it gets messy. When asked about how the State Department handled security failures before the attack, she famously said, "What difference at this point does it make?" Now to her it was probably a frustrated outburst. Shorthand for, we can debate for hours, but people are dead, and that's the priority. But to the public, it sounded like she was shrugging off American lives as if they were broken office chairs. Cold, detached, bureaucratic. Psychologically, that's classic defensive reframing. When faced with accusations, she tried to pivot the narrative away from accountability and onto the bigger picture. The problem is, reframing doesn't always land. Sometimes it looks like a cover-up, sometimes it looks like indifference, and in Hillary's case, it looked like she had just reached her emotional credit limit and decided empathy was no longer billable. Then came the hearings themselves. 11 hours under the hot lights of Congress. 11 hours of hostile questioning, accusations, and verbal attacks. And Hillary barely flinched. No sweat, no panic, no tears, just icy control. Now, If you admire resilience, that's impressive. If you're a psychologist, you might say she was demonstrating low affective reactivity, meaning she doesn't outwardly show stress the way normal mortals do. If you're a regular human being watching at home, it looked like she was running on a secret cocktail of Xanax and sheer willpower. And this is where her personality cuts both ways. On the one hand, Hillary's steel exterior made her seem unbreakable, capable of handling crises without cracking. On the other hand, it made her seem almost alien. Because while most people wanted to see grief, remorse, or at least some human outrage, what they got instead was a woman who looked like she'd just sat through a boring corporate board meeting about printer ink supplies. Critics argued she downplayed intelligence warnings, others said she mishandled security measures, and the investigations dragged on for years, costing millions, producing hearings that felt more like political theatre than truth-seeking. Yet through it all, Hillary's stone-cold resilience was the headline. That raises the psychological question, was this strength or detachment? Strength, in that she could survive scandal after scandal without blinking. Detachment, in that she seemed incapable of expressing authentic vulnerability, even when it might have saved her reputation. Because here's the cruel irony. If she had just cracked, shed a tear, admitted some failure with visible emotion, it might have humanized her. Instead, her personality, disciplined, calculating, armored, made her look like she didn't care. And perception is reality in politics. Benghazi didn't just become a foreign policy disaster, it became a personality Rorschach test. To her supporters, she was the resilient leader, enduring an unfair witch hunt. To her detractors, she was the icy bureaucrat, proving once again that she valued power more than people. So, what does Benghazi tell us about Hillary Clinton's psychology? That she is unflappable under pressure, almost unnervingly so. That she relies on compartmentalization as a survival strategy. And that her biggest weakness isn't necessarily the decisions she makes, but the way she communicates them. Hillary Clinton could stand in the middle of a hurricane, hair unmoved, eyes steady, notes in perfect order. But ask her to deliver one line that convinces people she actually feels something. That's where she collapses, and Benghazi was the ultimate test. A tragedy that demanded both competence and compassion. She had the competence. The compassion, well, let's just say it never made it out of the filing cabinet. And then there's the email scandal. Ah yes, the emails. The scandal that refused to die, no matter how many times Hillary insisted it was about yoga routines and her daughter's wedding plans. Here's the quick breakdown. While serving as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton decided, instead of using the official secure government email system, she'd run her own private server out of her home in Chappaqua, New York. Now that's like being the head chef of a Michelin star restaurant and saying, actually, I'd rather store all the meat in my garage fridge, next to the leftover Chinese takeout. This was not a small slip-up. We're talking about more than 60,000 emails. About half were deemed personal and deleted. That's around 33,000 messages gone forever. Poof. Some of them, later revealed, contained classified information. Now she explained it away with lines like, well, they were mostly about yoga classes, recipes, and Chelsea's wedding. Really? 33,000 emails about downward dog and flower arrangements? If that's true, then Hillary Clinton was less Secretary of State and more full-time wedding planner/yoga instructor. But here's where the psychology comes in. The private server wasn't necessarily about laziness. It was about control. Hillary has always had an almost compulsive need to control information. She doesn't like middlemen, oversight, or people snooping in her files. The private server gave her autonomy, independence, and zero accountability. That's not uncommon in powerful personalities. Psychologists call it high control orientation. It's the instinct to handle everything yourself because you don't trust the system. Or worse, you don't trust people to interpret your actions correctly. But here's the paradox. The very thing she thought would protect her, secrecy, became the noose that nearly strangled her political career. When the FBI got involved, things got even juicier. James Comey, then FBI director, famously declared that Hillary had been extremely careless, but not criminally liable, which is the professional way of saying, you definitely did something dumb, but not dumb enough to go to prison. Of course, the damage was done. Public trust cratered. People already suspected she was hiding things, and now it looked like she literally was. The image of Hillary with a digital paper shredder in the basement became burned into America's brain. And let's not forget the timing. The FBI's statements in 2016, just weeks before the election, revived the entire scandal like a bad sequel nobody asked for. Emailgate 2, this time it's personal. So what do the emails tell us about Hillary Clinton's personality? 3 things. First, she is meticulous to the point of paranoia. She wants to curate her image, even down to which emails survive. Second, she compartmentalizes like a pro. In her mind, those deleted emails weren't relevant to her role, so they didn't exist. Out of sight, out of subpoena. And third, she underestimates how her behavior looks from the outside. To her, it was practical. To everyone else, it looked like she was running a spy ring out of her basement while forwarding salsa recipes to Huma Abedin. That's Hillary in a nutshell. Not necessarily guilty of the wildest accusations, but always guilty of making herself look guilty. It's the psychology of suspicion magnetism. You could put her in charge of babysitting puppies, and by the end of the week, half the country would be convinced she sold them to a black market poodle ring. Let's pivot to her immigration policies, which were some of her most polarizing positions. During her campaigns, Hillary pushed for a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, defended sanctuary cities, and opposed stronger deportation measures. Now, to her supporters, this was framed as compassion and inclusivity. But critics saw it as reckless, a way to reshape the electorate and destabilize job markets. From a psychological standpoint, it's pragmatism. She's calculating the demographics of the future. She knows younger, immigrant-heavy populations tend to vote more liberal. So her policies weren't just about morality, they were about math, political math. The personality trait here? Strategic opportunism. She sees people as chess pieces. To her, immigration wasn't just a humanitarian issue, it was a long-term vote calculus. And like everything with Hillary, that cold calculation made her look less like a leader and more like someone programming an algorithm. And we can't talk Hillary without talking about the image. The endless pantsuits, the staged laughs, the "I carry hot sauce in my bag" line. All of it screams impression management. She knew her biggest weakness was likability, so she overcorrected. Except every attempt to look relatable came off as, well, the opposite. Like watching a robot trying to wink. Technically correct, emotionally unsettling. The pantsuit uniform, though, was genius psychology. A way to remove gender-based criticism, to standardize perception, to say, I'm not here as a woman, I'm here as a leader. But it also hardened her image into something more symbolic than human. So, what's the overall psychological profile? Hillary Clinton is ambitious to the point of obsession, resilient to a borderline superhuman degree, secretive, strategic and pragmatic, intelligent but often tone-deaf in human warmth. Her scandals, Benghazi, the emails, immigration controversies, all map onto those traits. They weren't random accidents. They were predictable outcomes of her personality. Her ambition pushed her into high-risk positions. Her secrecy made her hide information. Her pragmatism made her policies look cold and calculated, and that's why people struggle to trust her. Not because she lacked ability, but because her personality traits, when magnified under public scrutiny, created the perfect storm of suspicion. She wanted power more than anything. She worked harder than almost anyone. But when it came to connecting with the public, she always seemed one laugh away from confirming every conspiracy theory about her. So what do we learn from Hillary Clinton's personality? That ambition without warmth makes you a powerhouse, but also a lightning rod. That secrecy might keep you safe, but it makes the public think you're hiding bodies in the basement, and that no matter how many times you say what difference does it make, people will remember the exact difference it made. Hillary Clinton, the woman who could survive scandals like a cockroach after nuclear war, but still couldn't convince America she was trustworthy enough to drive the bus. Alright, that's our critical midnight roast. Drop a comment, like and subscribe, otherwise I'll start deleting emails about your browsing history. Good night, and may your server always stay public.